The dust settled around Katherine Blake as she knelt at her husband's grave, tears leaving clean tracks on her dirt-smudged face. It had been 3 months since the fever took him, but the ache in her chest felt as raw as the day he'd drawn his last breath. Colorado Territory in 1871 was no place for a woman alone, but Katherine had nowhere else to go. "I miss you, Thomas," she whispered, placing a small bunch of wildflowers against the wooden cross. "I don't know how to do this without you." The sun beat down mercilessly as Katherine remained there, her black morning dress soaking up the heat. The small homestead she and Thomas had built together stood just beyond the rise, a lonely testament to broken dreams. At 26, she hadn't expected to be a widow, struggling to maintain a home and small farm plot by herself. She didn't notice the rider approaching until his horse's shadow fell across the grave. Katherine looked up, squinting against the harsh light to make out the figure of a man astride a chestnut gelding. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Didn't mean to disturb your grieving." Katherine rose slowly, brushing the dust from her skirts. "Can I help you?" The stranger dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip looked well-maintained. "Name's Matthew Reynolds," he said. "Looking for work and water for my horse if you've got either to spare." Katherine hesitated. She desperately needed help with the farm, but trusting strangers was risky. "I can offer water, Mr. Reynolds, but I can't pay much for work," he nodded, leading his horse toward her homestead. "Fair enough. Been riding 2 days straight from Pueblo. Mind if I water my horse first?" Katherine followed him, keeping a cautious distance. "The well's behind the house. Help yourself." As Matthew tended to his horse, Katherine studied him. He moved with purpose, his actions efficient. When he removed his hat to splash water on his face, she noticed his hair was dark brown with hints of gold where the sun had lightened it. "Lost your husband recently?" he asked, nodding toward the grave as he replaced his hat. 3 months ago. "Fever," Matthew nodded, his expression unreadable. "Sorry for your loss, madam." "Katherine," she said, surprising herself. "Katherine Blake." "Mrs. Blake," he acknowledged. "That's a lot of land for one person to manage." Katherine gazed across the fields, where weeds were starting to choke out the crops Thomas had planted before falling ill. "I'm managing." Matthew followed her gaze. "No offense, madam, but you're not. Those crops need attention soon, or you'll lose them." His bluntness stung, but Katherine knew he was right. "As I said, Mr. Reynolds, I can't pay much. Room and board would do for now," he said. "I'm heading north eventually, but I could stay a spell. Help get things in order." Katherine hesitated. Having a strange man stay in her home went against everything proper, but the alternative was watching Thomas's dream wither and die. "There's a small cabin out back where the hands stayed when we had them. You can sleep there." Matthew nodded. "I'll start with that south field tomorrow. Looks to be in the worst shape." As Katherine watched him lead his horse toward the cabin, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But something about the steady way he carried himself reassured her. Perhaps this was the help she'd been praying for. The next morning, Katherine rose before dawn as usual, only to find Matthew already at work in the field. She paused on the porch, watching as he methodically cleared weeds from around the struggling corn plants. His movements were steady and practiced, like a man who'd done farm work before. When she approached with a canteen of water, he paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Morning, Mrs. Blake." "You started early," she observed, handing him the water. "Sun's less punishing this time of day." He drank deeply, then handed the canteen back. "You grow up farming?" Katherine shook her head. "I was a shopkeeper's daughter in St. Louis. Thomas taught me what I know." "You're learning in the hardest way, then," Matthew said, his gaze sweeping across the fields. "This land has potential, though." "It was Thomas's dream," Katherine said quietly. "He talked about building something to pass down to our children someday." Matthew's expression softened. "No little ones, then?" "No," Katherine said, the familiar ache returning. "We tried, but—" Matthew nodded, sparing her from having to finish the thought. Well, we've got work to do if we're going to save this season's crop. Over the next few weeks, Katherine found herself watching Matthew more than she should. There was something compelling about the quiet competence with which he approached each task. He spoke little of himself, deflecting personal questions with vague answers about drifting through the territories after the war. "You fought?" Katherine asked one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. Matthew nodded, his expression distant. "Union cavalry. Spent 4 years seeing things a man shouldn't have to see. And after, drifted, took work where I could find it." He glanced at her. "What about you? How'd you end up out here from St. Louis?" Katherine smiled faintly. "Thomas came west after the war. Said the city was too crowded with memories. He wrote to me about the land, the possibilities. I married him when he returned for me 2 years later." "Brave thing, leaving everything you knew." "It was," Katherine agreed, "but I loved him, and I came to love it here too, despite the hardships." As the days passed, the crops began to thrive under their combined efforts. Matthew repaired the barn roof, fixed fences, and helped Katherine expand her vegetable garden. They established a comfortable rhythm, working side by side during the day and sharing quiet meals in the evening. Katherine found herself laughing again for the first time since Thomas died. Matthew had a dry wit that emerged when he was relaxed, and occasionally he'd share stories of places he'd seen that made her world feel larger. One evening, as they sat shelling peas together, Katherine realized she was no longer constantly thinking of Thomas. The realization brought a wave of guilt that must have shown on her face. "Something wrong?" Matthew asked. "Just thinking," she said, unable to meet his eyes. Matthew was quiet for a moment. "It's all right to keep living, you know." Katherine looked up, startled by his perception. "Is it? Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying him just by." "By what? Not being miserable every minute." Matthew's voice was gentle. "That's not what people who love us want." "You sound like you speak from experience," Katherine said cautiously. Matthew's hands stilled. "Had a wife once, Sarah. Yellow fever took her and our baby before the war." Katherine felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry, you never mentioned." "Don't talk about it much," he said simply. "But I know Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to stop living. Your Thomas probably felt the same." That night, Katherine lay awake, thinking about Matthew's words. It had been nearly 4 months since Thomas died, and while she still missed him, the crushing weight of grief had begun to lift. She wondered if that was natural, or if it was because of Matthew's steady presence. The next day, disaster struck. Katherine was in the garden when she heard Matthew shout. She ran toward the barn to find him struggling to control a fire that had broken out near the hay storage. Without thinking, she grabbed a bucket and raced to the well. For the next hour they fought the blaze together, passing buckets back and forth until the fire was finally extinguished. The barn still stood, though one section of the roof and wall was badly damaged. Exhausted and soot-covered, they sat on the ground, catching their breath. "Thank you," Katherine said. "If you hadn't been here." "But I was," Matthew said simply. Katherine looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside her. His face was streaked with soot, his shirt soaked with sweat and water, but in that moment he was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his cheek. Matthew went very still, his eyes fixed on hers. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough. The sound of her name on his lips broke the spell. Katherine pulled her hand back as if burned. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Don't apologize," Matthew said quietly. The air between them crackled with tension, but Matthew didn't move closer. Instead, he rose and offered her his hand. "We should clean up, then I'll assess the damage." Katherine took his hand, feeling the calluses against her palm as he helped her to her feet. Something had changed between them, and she wasn't sure what to do about it. That evening, Matthew kept his distance, eating quickly before excusing himself to work on repairs. Katherine found herself missing his company, the quiet conversations that had become the highlight of her days. The next morning, Katherine awoke to the sound of hammering. She dressed and went outside to find Matthew already hard at work on the barn. having scavenged wood from an old fence to repair the damaged wall. "You're up early," she said, approaching with a cup of coffee for him. "Wanted to get this done while it's cool," he said, accepting the coffee without quite meeting her eyes. "Matthew, about yesterday, nothing to discuss," he said, taking a sip of coffee. "I think there is," Katherine persisted. "I've been alone these past months and you've been kind." "Perhaps I misunderstood." "You didn't misunderstand anything," Matthew interrupted, finally looking at her. "But you're still grieving and I'm still planning to move on. Getting attached wouldn't be fair to either of us." The words stung more than Katherine expected. "I see." "You're right, of course. It was a momentary weakness." Matthew's expression softened. "That's not what I meant, Katherine. You're an extraordinary woman. Any man would be lucky to have your attention, but I'm not staying and you deserve better than someone passing through." Katherine lifted her chin. "I'm not asking for promises, Mr. Reynolds. I'm fully capable of making my own decisions about what I deserve." She turned and walked back to the house, her back straight despite the trembling in her hands. She'd been foolish to think he might see her as more than a widow in need of assistance. Clearly, he saw her as a responsibility, not a woman. For the next few days, they worked together in strained silence. Matthew continued the repairs and field work, while Katherine focused on the garden and preserving food for the coming winter. They spoke only when necessary. The easy camaraderie of previous weeks gone, Katherine told herself it was better this way. She wasn't ready for feelings that complicated her grief. Yet she found herself watching Matthew when he wasn't looking, noticing the way the sun bronzed his skin and how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he concentrated. One afternoon, the sound of approaching riders broke the uneasy quiet. Katherine looked up from her washing to see 3 men on horseback approaching the house. She tensed, reaching for the rifle Thomas had taught her to use. Matthew appeared from the fields, moving to stand beside her on the porch. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The riders stopped a respectful distance away. The leader, a sharp-faced man with a sandy mustache, tipped his hat. "Afternoon, madam. Looking for a man called Reynolds." Katherine felt Matthew stiffen beside her. "What's your business with him?" she asked. "Personal matter," the man said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "He around?" Matthew stepped forward. "I'm Reynolds. What do you want, Decker?" The man's smile widened. "Well now, if it ain't the man himself. Been tracking you since Pueblo, Reynolds. You left some unfinished business." "No business I recall," Matthew said evenly. "And you're trespassing on Mrs. Blake's property." The man named Decker laughed. "Mrs. Blake, is it? You always did have a soft spot for widows. Tell me, does she know what kind of man she's harboring?" Katherine glanced at Matthew, whose face had hardened. "State your business and leave," he said. "You killed my brother," Decker said, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Shot him down in Pueblo last month. Your brother drew on me first," Matthew replied. "Marshall ruled it self-defense." "Marshall ain't here now," Decker said. "And I aim to settle accounts." Katherine's mind raced. Matthew had never mentioned killing a man in Pueblo. Was this why he was so determined to keep moving? "Mrs. Blake has nothing to do with this," Matthew said. "Give me an hour to gather my things and I'll ride out with you." "Matthew, no," Katherine protested. Decker's eyes narrowed. "Mighty chivalrous. But I'm thinking we might just burn this pretty little place to the ground after we're done with you. Send a message." Matthew's hand moved to his gun. "You won't touch her or this farm." 3 against 1, Reynolds," Decker sneered. "Bad odds." "Make your play," Matthew said quietly. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Katherine gripped the rifle tighter, preparing to defend her home. Suddenly, the sound of galloping horses broke the standoff. 4 riders appeared from the direction of town, led by a man wearing a marshal's badge. "What's going on here, Decker?" the marshal called as they approached. Decker scowled. "Private business, Marshal, nothing that concerns the law." "Threatening homesteaders is my business," the marshal replied. "Reynolds sent word you were tracking him, figured you might cause trouble." Katherine looked at Matthew in surprise. When had he sent word to the marshal? Decker's face twisted with anger. "This ain't over, Reynolds." "It is if you want to stay out of jail," the marshal said. "Now ride out and don't come back to this county." With a final venomous glare, Decker and his men turned their horses and rode away. The marshal dismounted, approaching Matthew with an extended hand. "Good to see you, Reynolds. Got your message yesterday. Appreciate the response, Marshal Jenkins," Matthew said, shaking his hand. "Mrs. Blake, this is Marshal Jenkins from town." "Madam," the marshal said, tipping his hat. "Reynolds here did the territory a service taking down Joe Decker in a fair fight. His brother's been causing trouble ever since." "You knew they were following you," Katherine said to Matthew. Matthew nodded. "Spotted their tracks a few days ago, sent word to the marshal when I rode into town for supplies." "Why didn't you tell me?" Katherine demanded. "Didn't want to worry you," Matthew said. "Thought I could handle it without bringing trouble to your door." The marshal cleared his throat. "Well, they shouldn't bother you again. We'll keep an eye out, but Tom Decker usually backs down when he's outnumbered." After the marshal and his deputies departed, Katherine turned to Matthew, anger and hurt warring within her. "You were going to leave with them. To protect you," Matthew said. "Without even discussing it with me," Katherine's voice rose. "This is my home, Matthew. I deserve to know there was danger." "You're right," Matthew admitted. "I should have told you, but I've brought enough complications to your life." "That wasn't your decision to make," Katherine said. "I'm not some fragile creature who needs protection from the truth. I've buried my husband. I've fought to keep this farm alive. I don't need you deciding what I can handle." Matthew ran a hand through his hair. "You're right. I'm sorry, Katherine. Old habits, I guess. After Sarah died, I promised myself I wouldn't put anyone else at risk." "Is that why you keep moving?" "Because you think you're dangerous." "I've made enemies," Matthew said simply. "Men like Decker who don't care who gets caught in the crossfire." Katherine stepped closer to him. "So you just keep running, never putting down roots, never letting yourself care about anyone." "It's simpler that way." "Simpler maybe, but lonely," Katherine said softly. Matthew's gaze met hers, vulnerability visible for the first time. "I can't offer you stability, Katherine. That's what you deserve." "I think I've had enough of people telling me what I deserve," Katherine said. "Thomas promised me forever and fate took him anyway. There are no guarantees in this life, Matthew." She was close enough now to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking you to stop pushing me away." Matthew's resolve visibly wavered. "Katherine." "Stay," she said simply. "Not forever, just don't run yet." He reached out slowly, his calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch sent warmth coursing through her. "What about Thomas?" "Thomas would want me to live," Katherine said, echoing Matthew's earlier words. "Not just survive, but live." Something changed in Matthew's expression, a softening, a surrender. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Katherine closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened as Matthew's arms encircled her waist. Katherine felt alive in a way she hadn't in months, perhaps years. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know what I'm doing," he confessed. "I haven't let myself feel anything in a long time." "Neither have I," Katherine admitted, "but I want to try." The weeks that followed were a slow bloom of rediscovery. Katherine found herself laughing more, the weight of grief lifting as she allowed herself to feel joy again. Matthew remained cautious, but his eyes followed her with unmistakable tenderness. They worked side by side during the day, gradually salvaging the season's crops despite the late start. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, talking about their pasts, their dreams, the future neither of them had expected. "I never thought I'd find peace again after Sarah died," Matthew confessed one night, his fingers intertwined with Katherine's. "I just kept moving, taking whatever jobs would keep me busy enough not to think." "And now," Katherine asked, Matthew looked at their joined hands, "now I'm thinking too much, about staying, about what that would mean." "You're still afraid your past will catch up to you," Katherine observed. "Men like Decker hold grudges," Matthew said, "and I've crossed paths with more than a few in my wandering years." So we face them together, Katherine said simply. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Matthew, just to consider that running isn't the only option anymore. The harvest came better than Katherine had expected given the difficult start. With Matthew's help, they filled the root cellar with enough to see them through winter, with some left over to sell in town. The money wouldn't make them rich, but it would keep the farm going another year. As the first frost approached, Katherine sensed Matthew growing restless. He'd spoken of heading north before winter set in, and though he hadn't mentioned leaving recently, she noticed him staring at the horizon more often. One evening, Katherine found him in the barn, cleaning his saddle. Her heart sank at the sight. "You're leaving," she said, not a question. Matthew looked up, his expression troubled. "I've been thinking about it," Katherine nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand, you never promised to stay." "Katherine," Matthew set aside the saddle and approached her. "These past months with you have been. I didn't know I could feel this way again, but winter's coming and the open trail is calling," Katherine finished for him. "It's all right, Matthew. I knew you were a drifter when I asked you to stay." Matthew caught her hands in his. "That's just it. I'm tired of drifting, tired of never belonging anywhere to anyone." Katherine's pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you," Matthew said, the words coming out in a rush. "And it terrifies me, because loving you means I have something to lose again, but the thought of riding away from you hurts worse than any fear." "Matthew, let me finish," he said gently. "I can't promise you'll never face danger because of me. I can't promise that men like Decker won't come looking, but I can promise to face whatever comes together. If you'll have me." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "Are you proposing, Matthew Reynolds?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Doing a poor job of it, aren't I? Should probably be on one knee." Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Katherine Blake, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise forever, no one can, but I promise to love you every day we're granted together." Katherine's heart felt too full for her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Matthew rose, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer you except my heart and these two hands." "That's all I need," Katherine assured him. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Marshall Jenkins and his wife as witnesses. Katherine wore her best dress, not the black mourning clothes but a blue gown that matched her eyes. Matthew had purchased a new shirt for the occasion and trimmed his beard. He looked nervous but determined as he spoke his vows. That night, as they lay together in what was now their bed, Matthew traced the curve of Katherine's cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked. "Very," she assured him, nestling closer to his warmth. "Are you?" "More than I thought possible," Matthew admitted. "Though I still worry about bringing trouble to your door," "Our door," Katherine corrected, "and trouble comes whether we invite it or not. Thomas and I thought we were building a safe, predictable life, and look what happened." Matthew's arms tightened around her. "I won't let anything happen to you." "I know," Katherine said, "and I won't let anything happen to you either. That's what being partners means." As winter settled over the Colorado territory, Katherine and Matthew fell into a comfortable routine. They repaired the house, adding insulation against the cold and fixing the chimney to draw better. Matthew built new furniture, including a rocking chair for the porch where they would sit wrapped in blankets, watching the snow fall. Katherine began teaching at the small school in town 2 days a week, using her education from St. Louis to help the local children. Matthew took odd jobs when they were available, but mostly focused on preparing the farm for spring planting, determined to make the coming year more profitable. One snowy evening in February, as they sat by the fire, Matthew brought out a small wooden box. "What's this?" Katherine asked as he handed it to her. "Open it," Matthew encouraged. Inside, Katherine found a delicate silver locket. "Matthew, it's beautiful." "Open it," he said again, his eyes warm. Inside the locket was a tiny portrait of the two of them on their wedding day, painted by the traveling photographer who had passed through town. "How did you manage this?" Katherine asked, tears pricking her eyes. "Had it made in Denver," Matthew admitted. "Took the photograph there last time I went for supplies." Katherine touched the locket reverently. "I love it. Help me put it on." As Matthew fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin, Katherine felt a rush of gratitude for the unexpected turn her life had taken. From the depths of grief, she had found love again, not a replacement for what was lost, but something new and precious. "I have something to tell you too," Katherine said, turning to face him. "Something I've suspected for a few weeks now." Matthew's brow furrowed. "Is everything all right?" Katherine took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Everything is wonderful. We're going to have a baby, Matthew." The look of wonder that spread across his face was something Katherine knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "A baby, you're certain?" Katherine nodded, smiling through her tears. "Dr. Mills confirmed it yesterday. By next fall, we'll be parents." Matthew pulled her into a gentle embrace, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd have this chance again," he whispered against her hair. "A family, a home, a future." "Neither did I," Katherine admitted. "When Thomas died, I thought my chance at happiness died with him. I never imagined I could love again, let alone create a new life." Matthew placed a reverent kiss on her forehead. "Thank you for not giving up, for being brave enough to open your heart again." "Thank you for stopping that day," Katherine said. "For seeing a widow sitting alone in the dust and not just riding past." "Best decision I ever made," Matthew said, his voice rough with emotion. As the fire crackled in the hearth and snow fell gently outside, Katherine leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. Life had taught her that nothing was guaranteed, that even the most heartfelt promises could be broken by circumstances beyond control. But it had also shown her that endings could become beginnings, that hearts could heal and grow larger, making room for new love without diminishing what came before. In the years that followed, the Reynolds farm prospered. Their daughter, Emma, was joined by twin boys 2 years later. Matthew's past occasionally resurfaces in the form of old acquaintances, some friendly, some less so, but they faced each challenge together. Katherine sometimes visited Thomas's grave, bringing their children to tell stories of the brave man who had first brought her west. Matthew would stand respectfully at a distance, understanding that this part of her past was sacred. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work was done, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant colors, their hands intertwined, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. For a widow who had once sat alone in the dust and a cowboy who had brushed her off and then promised as much forever as any mortal could, it was more than enough. It was everything.